Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a plunge into Doing It. Women Tell the Truth About Great Sex. It's a collection edited by Karen Pickering.
Yeah, you've shared these sources with us, and they're candid, fierce, sometimes pretty challenging stories.
Definitely. So our mission, is to dig into these and pull out the key insights. How women actually experience sex, desire, and all those societal pressures that come with it.
Exactly. And what you'll find is it's not some dry academic thing. It's raw, personal stories.
The real stuff.
The real lived experiences, yeah. The stuff that often gets, glossed over or maybe sensationalized elsewhere. It's a whole spectrum of views.
Okay, so let's start with the title itself, Doing It. Pickering calls it, what? Juvenile, gleeful, conspiratorial.
Literal, cheeky.
Right. It sets a tone straight away, doesn't it? Like we're getting the inside scoop, the unvarnished truth.
Totally. And I think for the listener, that title, it's meant to signal this act of reclaiming language.
And claiming how so.
Well, it's women talking plainly, directly about their sex lives. It reinforces that basic idea. A woman's body, her sexuality, it's hers. It's kind of a pushback against those old social taboos, the ones rooted in like a fear of female sexual agency.
And that leads right into this maze of societal pressures women deal with around sex. It feels like a constant contradiction.
Oh, absolutely. A real push and pull. Society often expects women to be sexual,
Yeah.
right? To provide sex, facilitate it, but only in very specific ways.
And at the same time, be kind of appropriately against it.
Uh-huh.
Or reserved.
Exactly. Be sexy, but oh, not too sexy. Love sex, sure, but only with one person. And, not too much.
Right. And then the consequences, pregnancy,
Right.
STIs.
Mhm.
The book points out how often that falls mainly on the woman.
It does. The responsibility, the judgment. It's
Yeah.
disproportionate. It ends up, as Pickering says, alienating women from their own bodies, their own desires. Like, your sexual self is mostly for other people.
It's like you're set up to fail, almost.
Mhm.
Be available, but don't initiate too much. Express yourself, but stay in these tiny boxes.
And then shut it down to be respectable.
Yeah. And you see this pattern starting really early with sex ed, or often the lack of it.
Definitely. Or when it does happen, it's often way too late.
And it's all about, like, the plumbing, right?
Yeah.
The biological mechanics.
Totally overlooks desire, pleasure, even consent sometimes.
What message does that send?
Well, for the listener, think about it. This purely mechanical, often late sex ed, it creates a massive disconnect.
Like Pickering's own story.
Yeah, her first orgasm happening years after she was sexually active, even a year before she started masturbating. It just highlights how much women are often left figuring things out alone in the dark.
Without good information.
Right. And if you never talk about pleasure or desire, the implication is, well, maybe that's not central to a woman's experience.
And the book really goes after some of those historical narratives too, doesn't it? Brigitte Lewis's piece.
Oh, yeah. She really takes apart those old Western ideas about white, cis, straight women. Either they have no desire or they're dangerously lustful.
Such a stark binary.
And Lewis brings up things that, still echo today, like the Victorian hysteria diagnosis, this supposed excess sexuality cured by marriage or, incredibly, doctor stimulation, which weirdly connects to the invention of the vibrator.
Wow. Okay.
And then you've got Freud, early 20th century, calling female sexuality a dark continent.
Right. With his whole immature clitoral versus mature vaginal orgasm thing, which is just
Deeply flawed, yeah. But these ideas, they stick around, subtly shaping how we think even now.
it's wild how much power those outdated, frankly, misogynistic ideas still have. And Lewis also points out the double standard that's still kicking, right?
Absolutely. Women getting slapped with labels like slut or whore just for expressing desire.
Well, at the same time, their desire is seen as somehow less powerful, less valid than men's.
Exactly. And this plays out in real life. The book mentions statistics like that 2006 Australian study.
The orgasm gap one.
Yeah, a huge gap, like 60% of straight women orgasming in their last encounter versus nearly 95% of straight men.
Wow. That's significant.
It really is. It's not just about mechanics. It suggests, whose pleasure often gets prioritized. It makes you ask whose experience is the default in straight sex.
And part of that, Lewis argues, is how we define real sex. This huge focus on penetration.
Right. Which totally ignores that for so many women, clitoral stimulation is key for orgasm.
Yeah, absolutely crucial. It forces you to think about what we even mean by sex and whose pleasure is centered.
Then Emily McGuire brings in a really personal angle on another challenge, religion versus emerging sexuality.
Ah, okay.
She talks about growing up with really restrictive religious views, clashing hard with her own curiosity and feelings.
That's a tough conflict.
Yeah, and her description of the sex ed at church youth groups is kind of unbelievable.
What was it like?
Fear-based analogies, like sticky tape losing its stickiness or a chewed-up lollipop.
Oh, wow. To discourage sex outside marriage.
Exactly. It just breeds shame and fear, not understanding.
You have to wonder what that does to a young person's sense of self.
Well, it can lead to a lot of internalized shame, confusion, but McGuire's story is also about eventually rejecting those views, exploring for herself. It takes courage, to dismantle those deep-seated beliefs.
Definitely. Okay, so then Jane Gilmore shifts focus a bit to long-term relationships.
Yeah, she talks about desire evolving over time. Her story about a relationship where she stopped initiating sex and then realizing this deep lack of intimacy she actually craved. It's really insightful about how desire can shift.
It can fade or get unbalanced.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what stands out is the contrast with a later connection. She describes this intense mutual longing just for a kiss. It just highlights how vital that emotional connection, feeling wanted, is for desire, which, can easily fade if you don't nurture it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Then there's Jackie Brown bringing in disability and sexuality. Yeah. Such an important perspective.
So important and often overlooked. Their journey of understanding their own attraction, dealing with internalized shame about their body, it's really moving.
And how did they work through that?
A big part was discovering the social model of disability. The idea that society disables people through barriers, not that their bodies are inherently the problem.
Right, shifting the focus.
Exactly. That helped reframe feelings of difference, anxiety, not as personal flaws, but responses to an ableist world. Finding disability communities online and off, using sex toys to reconnect. It's really powerful.
That's incredibly empowering.
And their experience of intimacy with other disabled people, described as both confronting and profoundly moving, it just broadens our whole understanding of connection, desire, what bodies are seen as desirable.
Really challenges those narrow norms.
Then Rosanna Beatrice dives into something else often swept under the rug: sex, pain, and menstruation.
Oh, interesting. Complex area.
Yeah, she looks at sex and headaches, how it can sometimes help, sometimes trigger them, and the surprising lack of solid research on sex helping menstrual pain.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, partly she points to the societal discomfort, the taboos around menstrual sex.
Still.
Yeah. Her own stories, trying to talk about it with her girlfriend, they're funny, but also highlight that awkwardness. How much does that squeamishness block open conversation or even finding ways to manage pain?
Good question. Okay, shifting gears again. Tilly Lawless on sex work.
Right, a totally different viewpoint. She talks about being a sex worker, the act itself, often straightforward, even leading to orgasm for her.
But then the stigma.
Exactly, a huge contrast between the physical act and the societal judgment. It's something to really reflect on.
And she distinguishes between work sex and relationship sex.
Clearly. She highlights the emotional support, the genuine intimacy that's missing in transactional sex compared to a loving relationship.
Yeah.
Challenges some assumptions, I think.
Definitely. What about the digital world? Amy Gray.
Yeah, she explores online relationships, sexting, the initial anonymity, maybe some role-playing, and how that can gradually lead to deeper trust as real identities emerge. It's a space many listeners probably navigate.
And the lines blur, right?
Yeah.
Online versus offline intimacy.
Totally. She raises that question. Is it performance of desire or real connection? And she also hits on the double standard again.
How so?
How male and female sexuality often get treated differently online, in public. Men often face less judgment for sexual expression than women do. Still
a thing.
Okay.
Pop music. Synod Stubbins. That sounds fun.
It's a great piece. She looks at how pop music shapes young women's ideas about love and lust, and how historically teenage girls' tastes were often dismissed.
That's changing.
Slowly, yeah. She traces how pop idols impact fans' feelings, longing, validation, what feels normal sexually, from George Michael carefully justifying "I want your sex,"
I remember that.
to artists like Madonna being more direct, and the Spice Girls really pushing female agency. Pop culture is a kind of practice ground for these feelings.
Practice love and lust through pop culture. I like that.
Jenna Price then shares her own evolution, her understanding of sex changing over her life.
How did it change?
Well, initially seeing it as something women just enjoy, focus on intercourse, then realizing over time the importance of shared intimacy, communication, mutual pleasure in relationships.
A common journey, probably.
I think so. And she's really candid about how kids leaving home affected her desire, rediscovering her own wants, even aversions. And she talks about secretly looking into vaginal reconstruction after childbirth.
Wow, that's brave to share.
It really highlights those often unspoken physical changes and how they impact self-image, sexuality. Very personal.
And Maria Lewis offers something a bit lighter, a dating story.
Yeah, a funny but kind of relatable story about a disappointing encounter from online dating. Met a very tall guy.
Uh-oh.
And the reality didn't quite match the expectation. It shows how unpredictable those first meetings can be.
True.
But then the follow-up, an unwanted explicit message, which, sadly, highlights a common darker side of online dating for women. Unsolicited stuff.
Oof, yeah, definitely a challenge. Okay, Van Batum, formative experiences.
Yes, a really powerful story about a sexual awakening happening kind of randomly behind a power box.
Okay.
It illustrates that intense personal awareness arriving suddenly, separate from the partner, active pursuit of pleasure, not just receiving it,
That's a key distinction.
and her later experiences with casual sex, coining the term awareness sickness. It captures the complexity, the messiness sometimes, of exploring sex on your own terms.
Does that make sense? Fiona Patton's sex industry, politics, activism, that's quite a mix.
It really is. Her career is fascinating. Advocating for sex workers' rights, HIV/AIDS awareness, fighting criminalization and stigma around sex work, pornography.
She was behind that open brothel day.
Yeah, a really proactive way to try and demystify the industry, get people talking.
Bold move.
And she talks about the ongoing pushback from religious, conservative groups, the problems with things like the Nordic model for regulating sex work. It's a complex political battleground.
Always seems to be.
Yeah.
Adrienne Truscott worked as a stripper, as, research.
Kind of. A real-life recon, she calls it, into society's paradoxes about female sexuality. Started with fear, ended up feeling liberated, in control,
How so?
by embodying those sexy stereotypes but keeping a critical feminist eye. It became a way to engage with customers, challenge their views on commodified sex.
Interesting. So it was more than just a job.
Yeah, like an introduction to her own body, her sexuality, but with this mix of feeling empowered and sometimes uncomfortable. Complex.
Then Michelle Law uses a quiz to talk about expectations.
Yeah, it's really clever and funny. It helps you pick apart those narrow, unrealistic ideas about what great sex is supposed to be, often very straight, very media-driven.
Like there's one right way.
Exactly. Her quiz just hilariously demolishes that idea. It underlines how subjective sex is, appetites, libidos, what feels good. It's all personal. No universal standard for incredible.
Thank goodness. Simona Castricum talks about the male gaze.
Feeling fear-stricken by her own body initially because of that pervasive external view.
And how does she move past that?
Through experiences with other women, gradually recognizing and embracing her own desires, reclaiming her own perspective.
And that boosted confidence elsewhere, too.
Absolutely. Understanding her own pleasure led to more confidence generally, being able to assert her wants and needs in all parts of life.
That's powerful. Okay, back to sex ed concerns with Anne Francis Watson's research.
Yeah, it's kind of concerning. Her research shows that even with the internet, young people today face similar confusion, same-sexist stereotypes as past generations.
So the internet hasn't solved it.
Apparently not. Parents are still uncomfortable with the talk. School sex ed is often limited, fear-based.
Still just say no for girls.
Often, yeah. And not enough focus on communication skills for healthy relationships. STI education is often too scientific, lacks personal relevance. Abstinence-only messages just don't work.
What about online info?
Well, young people are media savvy, critical, sometimes maybe too critical, distrusting decent sources because there's so much noise online. It's tricky.
And still silence around pleasure, masturbation.
Especially for girls, yeah. That silence delays understanding it's normal, healthy. We've still got a long way to go for truly comprehensive, destigmatized sex ed that includes pleasure.
Clearly. Amy Middleton offers a different take on intimacy, beyond sex.
Yeah, redefining love and connection. Her reflections on travel with a partner, realizing external places don't change the core relationship dynamics. And later, after intense relationships and choosing to abstain from sex for a while, finding deep connection and fulfillment in friendships, personal growth.
So challenging the idea that romantic sexual intimacy is the only or best kind.
Exactly. Broadening the definition of love, intimacy, what sustains us.
Nice. And finally, Clem Bastow brings it back to fun.
Yes. A nostalgic, funny look at her sexual awakenings, influenced by pop culture, like the song Cream.
Prince. Okay.
Her whole point is the importance of fun, not taking sex too seriously, sharing awkward, funny early experiences.
The takeaway being,
That sex is often inherently a bit silly, maybe embarrassing. So embracing the humor is key. It's a really freeing note to end on.
yeah, I like that.
So, wrapping up this journey through doing it, what you really see is this incredibly diverse, complex landscape of women's sexuality.
Definitely shaped by personal stuff and bigger societal forces.
Right. We've seen the impact of those pressures, the individual paths to discovering desire, the big problems with sex ed,
How relationships change, power of agency, pleasure in all sorts of forms.
and the big theme, again and again, is needing to challenge those old, restrictive narratives, to embrace how subjective, how multifaceted sex really is, for everyone.
So considering all these honest stories, these insights, it really makes you think, doesn't it? How can we, like, collectively build a more open, honest, pleasure-positive culture around sex and desire?
Yeah, a culture that actually empowers everyone to define their own version of doing it.
Without all the pressure and judgment. Something for listeners to chew on, maybe.
Definitely.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.